Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. So you know how we usually dress for the weather, but have you ever thought about what you wear is affecting the climate and the weather? Well, the fashion industry is one of the biggest contributors to CO2 emissions. And to talk more about how we can change that, we're connecting to Christina Dean in London, who's a sustainable fashion advocate and the founder of the NGO Redress. And from Taipei, we welcome Martin Su from Yi Chain International, a textile manufacturing industry. Now, Christina, I'm going to start with you first. Now, you're one of those who really pushed hard to get recycling boxes in big fast fashion companies and chain stores. How's that working out, and is that making much of a difference?
Well, yes, we Redress have implemented collection clothing containers in many stores, including Zara, Gap, and some Tommy Hilfiger stores across Hong Kong and Macau. And we've been doing this for about 10 years or so. And so what we're able to do is collect consumers' unwanted clothes. When they go shopping, they can drop off their unwanted clothes. And it leaves the consumer feeling much better about their fashion consumption and practices. It leaves Redress inundated with people's unwanted clothing. And so whilst it's a great benefit for us to be able to collect unwanted clothes, it's a tremendous complexity to actually use and find new usages for people's cast off clothing. And what we collect might break our backs in terms of its complexity. And unfortunately, it's really a tiny impact in terms of global consumption and global waste.
So, Martin, Christina is working to change mindsets on the consumer and on the fashion house, and you are working to change mindsets in the manufacturing end. How's that going?
Slow in general, but I would say a lot of it might say yes, but also it's a lot with our partners, right? Like, we're not the only one, we're just part of the dots on the whole value chain. So a lot of times it's really talking about the value streams on upstream, also downstream, and also our brand partners to be adaptable to potential proposed change, right? A lot of times we're talking about things that have been going on for like years, decades, if not longer, and they're very used to doing certain things a certain way, and because that's the efficient way. And that leads to kind of what we've been talking about, this whole fast fashion, mass production mindset and economic system. But to move away from that, it's a little tricky and difficult. And a lot of times it costs more in terms of price, costs more in terms of time, and also sometimes even more human resources as well. So a lot of it is a continuous of communication and try to figure out a balance to reach some kind of goals that we all have in common.
Okay, I want to bring in some numbers to put this into more of a global context. Textile waste is a global issue, but not all parts of the globe contribute to the problem in the same way. Now, certain countries produce and discard a lot more clothes than others. Just China and the United States are collectively responsible for producing over 40% of the world's textile waste. And in the US, only 15% of textile waste is recycled. Martin, I want to ask you about Taiwan in particular, though. I mean, we're one of the biggest exporters. I think we're among the top 10 of textiles. What is the situation when it comes to textile waste here, though?
Yeah, so it's definitely an ongoing issue. It's definitely something that's happening, whether it's from the mills, whether it's from the dyeing house, and if they're still operating for the manufacturing processes, the sewing processes, the production lines. They're everywhere. Basically, they are being produced by the hundreds of tonnage monthly in those facilities. Nowadays, ideally, they'll be able to go into the system to do something that we call the textile-to-textile recycling, and be able to reuse the textile to feed into the system as a raw material again. But before that, a lot of it goes to various sectors, right? Like whether it's about using as a cleaning material, a stuffing material. Some of it might be, if it's in fabric form, they can be sold to the second-hand market, both locally or abroad. But more recently, as the global pandemic situation is going on, the market wasn't that good. So a lot of time goes to, well, the graph that you show, right? Whether it's, well, in Taiwan, it's not so much landfill, it's mostly incinerator. It could become a source for that. A little better, sometimes they could be made into pellet form as a raw materials burning fuel. For the industry that needs boilers. So that could be another outlets for the waste of the fabrics.
And
Right.
Martin, you mentioned that word incinerator, and that always like makes my hair stand on end. Divya, if I may, that to really frame the problem that we are really trying to address with textile waste, it involves the consumer, because every year we're producing over 100 billion new clothes, and 73% of those will either be landfilled or incinerated. 73% of what we produce will be landfilled and incinerated after the consumers used it. And actually, consumers wear their clothes for much, much, much less time now. They say typically a garment is bought and it's worn only 7 or 8 times before it's discarded. And so when we talk about textile waste, whether you're talking about textile waste in Taiwan or Timbuktu, you have to realize that the consumer has a very big role to play in this. I mean, Martin, you're here somewhat defending and talking about the industry and the great things the industry can do. But the elephant in the room is that the consumer is not playing along with this, the good work. The consumer in the room here is still buying, wearing for a very short period of time and chucking away. And that really is the core problem. Overproduction, overconsumption, underutilization, and basically chucking your clothes away before you've even worn them more than 7 times.
Okay, if you want to distill this, go on, Martin.
Oh, no, I was about to say, to add on to that, I guess I was actually just talking about the industrial part. I mean, the production part. It's already generated tons of waste, even before people get their, fashion piece. So it's like to add that all up, it's a huge amount, right? A lot of times when you hear in the news and the statistic, you only see the information about the fabric or the garments, the t-shirts, what have you. But you don't really get too much news about the fabric, or you also don't hear too much about the knitting house of the cuts and all those parts. But that's also waste, right? So I was more addressing on that part already itself. It's a great quantity even before reaching to the consumers. So it's like adding the two together. It's definitely a huge issue. Whether you see it or not, definitely it's there.
So in that case then, Martin, what do manufacturers need to hear from consumers? What is the message that they need to clearly hear from consumers if they were to change their practices? What would make them perk up and say, okay, we're going to change. This is what consumers want.
And maybe that's the question I would be also asking for Christina, because I think one of the tricky things is it's not necessarily what we need to hear from consumers, because what we are operating right now is based on the old system of just mass production and mass sales, right? That's kind of what we've been told to do. But once we shift away from that system to have some kind of a service model per se, or secondhand model, I think ideally it's definitely very good. But from the manufacturer side of things, I'm having a hard time to reimagine how that would look like, right? So if we don't need to keep producing a production line, 3 shifts for 6 days, what have you, but just to provide some kind of either service or rental model for the consumers, then how does that work on a production line level? I know that, yes, production would need to be better, that we use less energy, less water, less chemicals, and hopefully it's more like direct, that it doesn't generate extra waste. But to shift the business model from a product to a service also means a lot lesser needs for human resources. And how does that work on the floor? I'm not exactly sure. Maybe Christina, you might have some insight into that to see how that could translate into the manufacturer side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the question should not be what do we need to hear from consumers. The question should be, what do we want to see consumers do? Because they're 2 different things. And let me explain why. Because basically, we have been hearing for way too long that consumers are willing to change and willing to do this and willing to spend 5% more, 10% more, 12% more for sustainable products. They say this, they say that, but they don't do it. So the question should be, what do consumers need to do to change the industry? And what consumers need to do is they need to buy less they need to buy better, and essentially they need to pay more for it. The reality is that over the last 15-ish years, we've seen the price of clothing decrease, even though other consumer goods have got more expensive, but clothing has come down, down, down in price. And that has squeezed suppliers like Martin and his competitors. And actually, it's the price of clothing that really is the problem. And so what we need consumers to do is somewhat, and I hate to say it, please forgive me, but consumers need to wake up to their responsibility. They need to buy fewer items of clothing. They need to buy better quality clothing, which essentially might cost a little bit more. They need to take better care of their clothes. They need to wear them for longer. And they need to keep their clothes in use. And they need to do that with a happy face and a happy heart and a happy wardrobe, because it is very possible to love clothes, to buy clothes, to enjoy fashion, to celebrate the beauty of fashion, creativity, personal expression.
Okay, so we're putting the onus on consumers. We've also put the onus on manufacturers. But how about the fashion houses? Christina, I want you to listen to this. We asked Celine Chou, a former editor of Harper's Bazaar in Paris, whether she feels that the fast fashion industry can become sustainable. And here's what she said.
Most of the people know fast fashion with the issues of the concerns for the environment. Of course, that it causes a lot of waste. But actually, I think it's quite problematic in all aspects, not just with the waste, like starting from the beginning, because we're paying less to the item. So it also means the companies, they're paying less for some part of their manufacturing, like the production process. I'm still quite suspicious when fast fashion brands trying to prove that they're using a more ethical sourcing, like or materials, because I think as long as this industry exists, it's very hard to have fast fashion to become a truly ethical brand.
So, Christina, there doesn't seem to be much faith that the fast fashion brands themselves are going to take responsibility. Is that how you feel?
Actually, I'm strangely, perhaps surprisingly, I would disagree with that. I mean, I'm very, very pro the fashion industry. I'm very pro the change that is happening. And I know that, of course, the fast fashion business model in itself has got a huge amount of responsibility for the crisis that we're in. That said, the fast fashion industry also has a great opportunity to drive positive change. The fast fashion industry makes a lot of money, it employs a lot of people, it drives a lot of the economy. So we can't poo-poo the fast fashion industry and bring it down, because actually our economy is somewhat pegged to it. So I actually would say that what we have to be is realistic. The fast fashion industry is here to stay. So what we need to do is empower it and to enable it to have more sustainable materials and processes. And we need to see that the fast fashion industry can bring less polluting clothes to consumers, and those consumers need to take more responsibility for how they take care of their clothes once they've bought them. In many ways, you know, if you have a very small disposable income for yourself, and if you go into a fast fashion company and you buy 2 T-shirts and a pair of jeans, if you take good care of those, you could wear them for a very long time. And so to answer your question in summary, I think that fast fashion industry is definitely working extremely hard. I think that the big global businesses are highly committed to finding more responsible, sustainable raw materials. And so the answer is to support more sustainable raw materials for the fast fashion industry.
Okay, so that brings me back to you, Martin. You come from the raw material fabric end of it. Do you feel like if you changed, or if the manufacturing changed their practices in the kind of material they use, do you feel like there's appetite from these fashion brands to consume that, even if it is at a higher price?
Yes and no. I mean, this whole situation right now is that there is definitely more of a trend going on with the sustainable fashion. So there will be some kind of demand for that, but the speed and the quantity is not as fast as we would like to see. We are trying to find better sourcing, try to get better production methods and all that. But like mentioned earlier, if there's no care in the process, we're basically resolved to sticks, right, or our own costs. And that translates to if consumers are willing to pay for it, and that relates to how brand perceive that, right? If their marketing team doesn't see that as something they can sell, they're not going to demand more.
Okay, so maybe this has to be come top down. I mean, Christina, I want you to tell us a little bit about the EU strategy for sustainable circular textiles by 2030. I think they started that last year. Can you explain what that is and whether you feel like it has traction?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is essentially an EU recommendations for how to green up the fashion industry for products that are imported into the EU. And it's basically a whole raft of recommendations that deal with the entire life cycle of a product. So really the way that I read the report, it's as if a group of experts have got a big whiteboard out and they've imagined this nirvana, beautiful, amazing way that fashion can be designed, produced, and recycled, etc. And so it's a recommendations as long as my legs to make the fashion industry more sustainable. And so I certainly think it's aspirational, it's exciting, it's everything that we need, although some people still say it doesn't go far enough. But from my perspective, if we, the global industry or the EU in particular, can enact all of the recommendations in the next 10 years, I will resign and go and live on a beach because I will be so amazed.
Okay, so at least people are thinking about it, even if it doesn't seem that it could result in concrete action right away. We can always hope. Martin, do you see anything like that in the environment here, especially when it comes to government policy or maybe industry policy that will allow you to realize your dream of being able to be sustainable and profitable?
I think because part of my background coming from more like the nonprofit side, working with people with campaigns, going on streets, like activists and all those kind of network, and now being in business, sometimes also work closely in the past with the government projects, just made me realize one thing. We keep talking about government, we're talking about consumers, talk about manufacturers. We're all intertwined. You know, like for me, we're all connected. Like we all are parts of the solutions. So part of it, I think the solution is more about wherever you are within the whole economic chain of the industry, you need to pull your own weight, right? Like when you need to make a decision, you should choose the one that you think that's the best for the environment and best for the people. And if you are a manufacturer, we should look into technology and methods and ways to reduce our impact as a company. And if there are any chances, like today, to share the ideas, also the chances to share the ideas to the politician, to advocate them to change, because everything needs to be connected. Policy needs to push the industry to change. People also need to be willing to accept the change from the industries. And then people can also push the government for the policy change. We are also trying to educate our employees, right? Like we are trying to internally do some kind of environmental activities, group actions, or volunteering work relates to nature. Like whether it's a beach cleanup, whether it's like some kind of talks about plastic, watching documentary, going to certain events, just to get people the sense that you are part of this, right? Like it's not just about you working a job making fabrics or a dyeing house or knitting house or what have you, but it's a larger system that relates to the initial discussion, climate change, and it will impact your life. Not about like whether you eat how much microfiber from the fish you just had yesterday, but it's also like people from another side of the planet. There will be impact on your decision and your choices. And we are all part of it. And when you have a choice, back to the consumer topic, what are you going to buy? Are you going to choose the more sustainable items? We think yes. And then we think we wanted to send a message as a manufacturer to our employees that you should do that too. Because when the time comes, we'll be okay. We'll be on top. And hopefully that's when the policy changes. And that's what we need to be preparing for. And I think that's why in a lot of times, you have to think in a really holistic view and think of everything as a cycle and a circle, that we are all connected and we all need to do our part.
And Martin, you brought me very smoothly to our next piece about someone who's doing their part. So even if consumers don't change overnight, there are some designers who are cutting around the problem by using techniques like zero waste patterning. Jessica Chang is a young Taiwanese designer featured at this year's Taipei Fashion Week. We went to her studio in Taipei to learn more about what she was doing.
Zero waste patterning technique is basically using the entire fabric roll without any scraps. So traditionally when we make clothing, we don't think about this. So there's a lot of curves, a lot of weird shapes, such as like the neckline or the shoulder, and that causes a lot of like gaps when you're cutting the fabric. And those gaps become odd-shaped fabrics that's hard to use. So in zero-waste patterning, we strive to fill the entire rectangle so that all the sides are touching each other. When you cut the fabric, there's no waste. That's basically the idea of it. What I'm wearing right now is actually a piece that we made that's zero-waste patterned. And as you can see, it looks very normal. It looks just like a hoodie, but we've took those scraps and placed it in different areas that actually enhances the clothing and at the same time reduces waste, such as here you can see I have a gusset over here, and you can see it's made of like 3 little pieces of scrap fabric, and they're actually from the hood of this hoodie that's left over, and we decided to use it in a gusset.
So Christina, I mean, that's one solution and one designer looking at that. But, speaking more broadly, what is the one fundamental message you have for consumers or people who buy clothes that you feel will make a massive difference?
Buy the best quality that you can, take good care of it, wear it for as long as possible, and keep the materials in use. Never put your clothes in the rubbish bin. And always, find a recyclable, recycled, or swapping or reuse route for your unwanted clothing.
And Martin, you have some quite lofty goals for your company and your manufacturing process. I believe by 2030 you're hoping to go net zero. Am I right? How are you getting on with that, and how are you hoping that others get on board with your example?
Yeah, so definitely we are looking to our production lines, basically. I think material by itself cannot reach the goal for us. We definitely need to change the way we produce. So we are looking to different ways of production in regard to the methods that we have today. And I think a lot of it for us, it's really about the willingness to change, right? And I think that's something that we are really keen to try, that we think we have some kind of solution, but we would like to have more adaptation to support that change and shift in the way we do business as a manufacturer to reach the goals towards net zero, which is a goal for most of our brand partners anyway. But it's more about how can we get there as soon as possible rather than being pushed by a top-down situation.
Right, we're just about running out of time, but before we go, I'd like to end the show on a positive note. There are people who are trying to create fashion in a way that's both environmental and sustainable and socially responsible. Here's Sandy Chiu's report.
In Taiwan, fast fashion and cheap clothes are a major contributor to pollution and environmental waste. About 72,000 tons of clothes are being thrown away each year, which amounts to 438 pieces of clothing dumped per minute. The rise of companies like Zara, H&M, Uniqlo, and many others made low-cost and dispensable clothes popular around the world. It's an issue that has become apparent to Kwan Chen when she was in the UK. Alarmed by the impact of fast fashion on the environment, she made it her mission to give clothes a second life when she returned to Taiwan. In 2018, she created Storywear, a specialized linen recycling company.
When I was studying for a master's in the UK, I found that sustainable fashion is an industry the markets in the West are familiar with. And because of this, I understood why we needed it. You will realize that many issues exist behind it.
The fabric Chen uses mainly comes from old jeans donated by businesses or customers. And creating something attractive out of discarded items does not come without its challenges. It takes an average of around 3 to 9 hours to transform the old into new, and this time does not include designing them. And the tag on each redesigned item has the name of who worked on it and how long it took.
After recycling the secondhand jeans, we need to wash them. So as we can see from our clothes, each pair of jeans are different in thickness and patterns. So our tailors need to pick each one of them out to dismantle and make something new. All must be made one by hand.
But she says there's a long way to go to make a dent in fashion pollution. That's made storywear even more determined to get the message across the fashion industry.
I think we should be reminded more often about sustainable fashion. I think in the past few years, when you see the trend of fast fashion, which is kind of scary because it impacts so much environment. Because when you buy cheap clothing, you have to know that they are made by weak fibers, mostly polyester, right? Which is very bad for environment.
Storywear has recycled at least 15,000 pieces of jeans. Stitch by stitch, they hope to continue the stories of clothes that would have been long forgotten and promote the idea of sustainable fashion. Damon Lin and Sandy Chi for Connected.
And that's all the time we have for this episode of Connected. In this discussion, we tried to bring together the various aspects of sustainable fashion, environmental concerns, business interests, manufacturing challenges. Our hope is that in the future, we can all wear a little more green. And a huge thank you to both my guests, Christina Dean and Martin Su. It's been great to have your thoughts and insights. And to our viewers, thank you for your company. We hope to see you again soon. Stay connected.